Hello and welcome to After Scientology, Straight Up and Vertical, the weekly show where Tony Ortega and I get together and talk about the news in Scientology as reported on Tony's Substack. Hey, Tony, welcome back to the show.
Great to be back, Chris. Back home after my trip last week up to Maine.
Yes. No more eclipses.
You know, that was real science, not the kind of things L. Ron Hubbard said he was doing.
Absolutely. In fact, I'll just jokingly, somebody mentioned something I thought was really cute, which is, there's all this anti-science nonsense out there. But when science says, here's where the eclipse is going to be, everybody goes there. Why? Because we actually do trust science. So.
Yep.
All right. We had a pretty eventful week this week in Scientology reporting, starting with let's hit some of the not so wonderful stuff necessarily. The new judge in Leah's case, or there is going to be a new one assigned. What's the whole rundown on this one?
Right. The last time we talked about this, we were both kind of surprised and interested in the fact that Judge Randolph Hammock did not want to give up Leah Remini's lawsuit. He had made this major ruling, early ruling in her lawsuit that did dismiss a number of Leah's defamation claims, but kept most of the most important things intact. The harassment claims, tortious interference of her business, that kind of thing is still in there. And Scientology was very unhappy about that. And so they did two things. David Miscavige personally filed a peremptory challenge, meaning, the theory being if you're in a lawsuit, you get one time where you can just say, I don't like that judge, get rid of him, and you don't have to give any real reason. There's no argument. And he did that. He filed that challenge. And then the next day, the attorney for the Church of Scientology International filed notice that they're going to appeal that ruling. So normally you'd think, okay, well, let's see who the next judge is, because this is already the third judge in this case. But Judge Hammock said, hey, wait a minute. I just gave a major ruling. Is it too late for Miscavige to do that? And he asked both sides to give him some reasoning on that. And we talked about this last time, Chris, that, everybody wants to just have nothing to do with Scientology cases. Here for, a very rare instance where somebody is like, yeah, I'm dug in now. I've researched everything. I don't want to go anywhere. But I think in the ensuing days, he realized that, look, this just, Miscavige did have a challenge. It was timely. And so, it just all kind of went away last week. And the judge said, okay, I'm out of here. So randomly, the next person chosen was this Judge Holly Fuji. I'm not exactly sure how to say her name. It's Fujie. And we'll see. I mean, I'm immediately hearing from people saying, oh, she's the worst judge ever. Check her out on this website or that website. But you hear that about every judge. There's always people that hate a particular judge for how it handled their case, whatever.
Right.
So I have, no way of knowing yet how this is going to go. The first thing she did was schedule a May 29th hearing in Leah's suit. What Leah's trying to do at this point, she wants leave to file some things to make up for what was taken out in Hammock's ruling. So, for example, a number of the things she wanted to sue over, terrible things that Scientology has said about her that she says are untrue, were just a little too old. They had done it like 2 or 3 years before the lawsuit came out. So she has found examples where they said those same things on their Twitter feed last month, because that's what Scientology does. They're just constantly hitting Leah and Tracy McManus and Mike Rinder and me over and over and over again with the same smears and misinformation. So I don't think it was too hard for her to find new examples of those same claims, and she'd like to put those back into the lawsuit. So that's one of the things that this new judge will take a look at. And so we'll get a pretty early idea of how she handles it that's different than Judge Hammock. And you and I had talked about how we liked that he not only had worked very hard on it, but he was talking about using common sense, which we don't really hear in a Scientology lawsuit. So will she see it that way, or will she be a big change? We'll find out next month.
This is one of those horrible places where sort of the personal arbitrariness of the justice system comes in as a factor. And we commented on this before because Hammock was so good and so careful, which is the thing I appreciated. He really spent his time trying to understand what was in front of him and not just playing procedural, golf with it, right? And that's what we tend to see so many of these judges do. In fact, unfortunately, rolling right into our next story, the Florida trafficking lawsuit. There was an update on this after months of kind of wondering what was happening with this thing, and it didn't really go in our favor, to be honest. What was the story on this?
Yeah, almost a year. Valeska
Wow.
Paris and the Baxters have had to wait for the 11th Circuit to say something, anything. Valeska and the pack that Gawain and Laura Baxter are former Sea Org members who were suing in Tampa, Florida, even though all three were residents of Florida when they filed residents of Australia when they filed the lawsuit in Tampa, Florida, saying that, as children and then adults, they had been recruited into Scientology Sea organization, had been, all three of them were working on the Free Winds cruise ship that sails the Caribbean and were treated horribly. I mean, they had all these examples of just absolutely horrendous stuff,
Yeah.
including sexual allegations in regards to Valeska. And, we worried a little bit that it was a difficult place to be suing because not only were they in the same courthouse, they were literally in the same courtroom that the Garcias had been in several years earlier when their lawsuit against Scientology was forced into arbitration.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people that were supporting this trafficking lawsuit wanted to believe that because the allegations here were so much worse, the Garcias, if you remember, were suing over the fact that they'd been lied to in order to get donations out of them. Whereas Valeska and the Baxters were suing over being held against their will and being worked around the clock and being separated from family and then just all kinds of deprivations and things, just terrible. And, surely that would have to count for something. Well, when it came down to it, Judge Thomas Barber said his hands were tied. The way American arbitration law is set out, if these folks signed a contract that obliges them to not sue and go to arbitration, they have to do it. So the thing that makes it Scientology arbitration so insidious is that you have you have to put together a panel of three arbitrators who are Scientologists in good standing, and any ex-Scientologist will tell you when you sue the Church Scientology, you are declared an SP, a suppressive person, and there's no way a panel of current Scientologists is going to hear your case fairly.
That's
Also,
right.
there's the idea of making these people crawl back to their abusers after they're suing over being abused. But the judge in that case said the Supreme Court rulings, for example, say that, well, you have a argument that you signed that contract under duress. Guess what? That's for the arbitrator to decide. I mean, the court can't even consider that. And he was frustrated about that. You could see. So he felt his hands were tied. He had to rule that you sign the contract, you go into arbitration. Now, normally, they would then have to go through this kangaroo court arbitration. And after that, once the judge accepts it, then you can go to a higher court and appeal. And that court will have to consider it. You're not rolling the dice or anything. You will get an appeal. What they asked the court was, though, that this would take years. Would you allow us to appeal it now? See,
Yeah.
there's no obligation from the court to give them that appeal at this point because they want to do it early. But the
Right.
judge said, I will give you that permission. You can petition the higher court and see if they'll give you an appeal. So that's what we've been waiting for 10 months for, is that higher court, the 11th Circuit, just to indicate if they're going to even allow them this appeal, which again, they're not obliged to give them at this point. And now after 10 months, this panel of three judges voted 2-1. Nope, you're not getting an appeal. Go to arbitration. So, it's heartbreaking because, again, like with Valerie Haney, Valeska Paris now has to go crawling back to her abuser to present her evidence to a panel that won't allow her an attorney in the room, won't allow her to bring a cell phone with her, won't allow her to get a transcript or anything of what goes down.
Yep.
And what we just saw, I wrote for Daily Beast about what Valerie's been going through on that is rather than, okay, we'll arbitrate your claims, no, they've been abusing her over her whole career as a Sea Org member.
Exactly.
It's so insane, Chris. And that was the bad news we got this week, that the 11th Circuit would not give them that opportunity to appeal the decision before going through arbitration. They're going to have to go through the arbitration if they want to get to an appeal at some point.
It's gross. And I have to say that if this is based on some Supreme Court precedent-setting ruling, then the Supreme Court has their heads up their asses. I'm sorry, but how else am I supposed to put this?
Well, but see, I'm not going to defend the Supreme Court on that. But when you look at the rulings, they're about things like a paint company.
Right.
That's part of the problem is that this is litigation that was literally enacted in 1925.
Right.
And we're talking generally like business disputes. It's not set up to deal with this thing that's calling itself a church but acting like the mafia. The courts are not prepared to deal with an organization like that.
That's right. That's right. And we are so in the 1800s in our legal theory in this country. And this is a drum I'm going to keep beating because it needs to be. This is exactly the outcome of not having clear-cut understanding of what coercive control is in a legal sense from a psychological perspective in courts of law. These judges have no clue what this stuff is about. And yet they're having to rule on this procedurally, and it's resulting in injustice. This is just straight up wrong. And their hands are tied. I don't necessarily believe that. Judges are there for a reason, but I think that that up and down the line here, they have gotten it wrong in their precedents because of the context of this. And we need some bright bulbs, some legal eagles out there, because I am not that, and you're not that. But we need people out there who are to deal with this. This is not a small problem, and there are other cults out there who watch Scientology and they copy them and they do what they do. And you nailed it in saying that this is an organization pretending they're playing at being a religion. What they are is an authoritarian mind control cult. That is, sorry, but that is what it is. So, oh, this makes me mad as it does you. Okay. Now, on the other side of the coin, and literally on the other side of the pond, we have an update out of East Grinstead and this town council complaint hearing. What was this about?
Well, Alex Barnes Ross has been on a roll since the IAS 3-day gala in November that he protested. And he's been making requests of the East Grinstead Town Council, which is the location where Scientology has its UK headquarters, St. Hill. And the town has just been acting really strange about it. They've been hiding some video from one of their open public meetings about Scientology. They've been censoring meeting minutes. And Alex requested an opportunity to make a complaint about that. And the way it worked out, he got to sit down with two members of the council, of the 16 counselors. And what's interesting leading up to it was that he had initially been scheduled to sit down with two counselors who appear in Scientology promotional materials. And he said, no, that's not going to work. So they went around a few times, but what he told me was out of the 16 counselors on the East Grinstead Town Council, there are only 4 who don't show up in Scientology promotional materials.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Two of them couldn't make it. So that's how he got the 2 that he did. And he had a very good presentation. He gave me a copy and I published it. explaining why it's so offensive to ex-Scientologists the way these council members have been showing up at Scientology events, showing up in their promotional materials, and really trying to, silence any criticism. And what I thought was great was he said at the end, these two counselors were really very open to the idea. He's asking for a formal apology. He's asking for certain things. You got the sense that he may not get everything the way he's asking, but that these two counselors are going to go back and say, listen, this was improperly handled, the way these materials were censored. We do need to be more sensitive to these people that have been abused. I really felt, based on what Alex said, that there was some real progress here. And that's, Chris, that's where we so often hear nothing.
Yeah.
That complaints are made and lawsuits are filed, and you just never hear about any sort of progress being made, especially with public officials. But, Alex is a persistent guy, and it looks like he may have made a little progress with the leaders of East Grinstead, England.
Yeah, it's impressive. It really is, because he's bringing all the details and he's really caring and he's showing up. I mean, he literally went from Paris to, this meeting to, I mean, he is just on fire. And amongst the points that they recommended to the rest of the council, which now we have to see if the council will adopt this, but was to get these people out of Scientology's promotional materials. It is wholly inappropriate. And these people have completely lost sight of their position to
And
be
again,
featured.
that's such a smart thing to ask for, because it's the kind of thing that they can do. They can just say, hey, listen, Scientology, listen, thank you for inviting us to the event. We're glad we went to the event, but don't put us in the video.
Right.
Take us out of the video. That's not that hard for Scientology to do. And it fundamentally begins to change the relationship between the city council and Scientology. So I think it's a smart thing to ask for. And it looks like maybe to some extent it'll happen, which is a great victory, I think.
Absolutely, because it's especially good as a leverage point, because if they say no, you're like, okay, so you're going to insist on continuing to pimp for Scientology? Is that really the position you're holding right now, that you're going to insist as a government official in doing that? And it isn't, and that's why I say it's inappropriate, because they shouldn't be doing that for anybody.
Right.
I would say the same thing about any Christian group, Muslim group, whatever. So definite forward progress with Alex, and let's see what happens. Hopefully this next week in them adopting these, choosing to follow this. And finally, this was a fun one, because this was just today. You had a story on 1951 and media reporting about L. Ron Hubbard, which I have definitely found to be a media-rich time period for Hubbard. What you got there?
Yeah, I know you're real familiar with it. We've talked about it before. It's something that I've always, there's great stuff in the movie Going Clear, for example, where they're quoting from Sarah Northrop about what she was going through. It's part of what Larry Wright had in Going Clear that nobody had before. There's a lot known about that year, but it fascinates me that L. Ron Hubbard went from this fairly well-known pulp fiction author from the 30s and 40s to suddenly, on May 9th, 1950, becoming this self-proclaimed expert on the human mind that proved to be very popular. And his book Dianetics was very popular, and there were soon groups all around the country experimenting with this idea that you could remember what it was like in the womb, and you could remember your birth, and it would help you deal with your problems today, et cetera, et cetera. And, then of course today we see there's the Church of Scientology, and there's all these books and everything. It seems like a straight line, but it's not. And that's what some people don't seem to understand, is after that first year of a lot of success, the next year, 1951, was an utter disaster. I mean, Dianetics basically went out of business, and L. Ron Hubbard's personal life it exploded.
Yeah.
And I think we've all probably heard bits and pieces of that, or you might be very familiar with it. But what I did in this case was I have this helper who goes through old newspaper archives and sends me things. And I had mentioned to him that I had a particular interest in 1951 and doing something specifically about that, because I hadn't looked at it all in a long time. So he sent me clippings from LA, from Wichita, um, and other places, and I just put together the highlights of what happened in February and April and later. And when you put them all together like that, it's pretty incredible that, L. Ron Hubbard's second marriage was falling apart to Sarah Northrup. And so he kidnapped their kid, their 12, year-old child, Alexis, and first secretly put her in a nursery in West LA. And then the baby got sent to New Jersey. And then eventually that year, Hubbard went to Cuba with the baby. Meanwhile, the mother, Sarah, is frantic trying to find out what's going on with her child.
Yeah.
And so she hooked up with this attorney who decided, let's play hardball. And so they went to the press and said, Hubbard's crazy. He's been beating her, strangling her. We don't know what he's done with the child. And it was news everywhere. And I guess, Chris, I look at that and think, Dianetics wasn't even a full year old yet. And you would think that this kind of publicity might make it really difficult on L. Ron Hubbard. It's kind of amazing that he got, and by the end of the year, by the beginning of 1952, Dianetics was broke. But he had an angel. He had this oil tycoon that bailed him out, and he gradually started rebuilding things in Phoenix. That's another story. But for 1951, it's truly incredible what he put Sarah through. He essentially kidnapped her child with the use of these goons. And I actually found a photograph of one of them. I'd never seen that before. I got lucky. I found this photograph of this Dessler guy. Man, he looks like a mafia thug, doesn't he?
Yeah. He was literally definition of a fixer, and he was a lawyer. I mean, I immediately was jumping to Michael Cohen when I heard about this guy. And he served that purpose for Hubbard through 51 and into the future. I saw correspondence between them a year or two after this.
And this is also when Sarah made it public that Hubbard had married her before he had divorced Polly, Louise, Margaret. She's got like 3 different names. I never know exactly which one's the legal one. But Margaret Grubb, his first wife, they were still married into 1947, a year after he had married Sarah. So that's when that became public. So damaging of Hubbard came out that year. This part was new to me. I don't know, maybe Larry Wright had it, maybe Russell Miller had it in their books, but at one point, when she could see what Sarah was doing in the press and making these claims about being strangled and beaten and everything, that Margaret wrote her a letter and said, I believe everything you're saying because it happened to me too. That's right. And I'm just like, whoa.
Yeah, exactly. The beatings, all of it, she said.
Hubbard's just really fortunate there wasn't an internet back then, because you have a story here, a story there. He keeps moving. Right. We find Wichita, Phoenix. Nobody knows who he is. In fact, that's why I included that one little clip there from Wichita when he first gets there, or when the company first gets there, and they're like, "Oh, the L. Ron Hubbard's moving his business here. Oh yeah, oh, have you noticed he's on the run because he kidnapped his own child?"
That's right. That's right. If you
do that, you could do that back then. You could just, if you were in hot water, just move to a different part of the country. Nobody know who you were.
That's exactly right. That's the definition of fly-by-night operation. And that is exactly what Hubbard did all through 51. People, you can put the pieces back together and it's all there. And that's why I loved this article, because it really lays it out. And the media was tracking with him. I mean, that was as drama celebrity as he got, was that time period. And it was almost all over. Like, you got to understand. I mean, Scientology started with a handful of people. Hubbard had tanked it, and he had tanked it twice. I mean, it was really incredible luck that he managed to get the enablers around him that he did to rise from the ashes in Phoenix, right? So, anyway, it's a fascinating story in and of itself. And none of this, by the way, and I mean not one comma of this, is in any of the church official history of L. Ron Hubbard.
You know, and I heard from I heard from quite a few old timers on this that I normally don't hear from, who were like, wow, thank you for putting this together. I never really saw all this. I mean, these are people that were in for 30 years and have been out for 20 years, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you again to my newspaper clipping guy that goes through and finds these things. Again, none of this is new, that it wasn't known already by Russell Miller and Barefaced Messiah and Lawrence Wright and Going Clear. But there's something about putting those clippings together that way, so that you can kind of read it yourself as it was coming out publicly. And then she used this. I didn't know this. She used this World War II hero to track Ron down in Wichita. I had no idea about that. He was kind of the Audie Murphy kind of guy. And Sarah enlisted him to track down Ron. Oh, what a great detail.
Oh, that's wonderful. All right. Well, you know, if you want to know a little window into L. Ron Hubbard's true character, that would be the time to look. It really came out, and he was, oh man, was he fit to be tied back then. Okay. Well, Tony, thank you very much for the breakdown on this week's events and everything. Do we have any preview of coming attractions?
Well, the big event this week will come on Tuesday, when Jane Doe gets her chance to argue against Scientology's motion to force her lawsuit, the forced marriage lawsuit, into arbitration. Once again, that's Tuesday. And you know, again, I'm hearing from people, well, her allegations are so serious and they're awful, and she was forced into a marriage as a minor. And that's absolutely true. And those are excellent reasons why it should not be forced into arbitration. But that didn't matter in Valeska's case. So that's what's so worrying. And so we will see on Tuesday what happens with that.
All right. Okay, folks. Subscribe to Tony's Substack, address right there on the screen for you, and get your daily notifications so you're up to speed on what's happening in this crazy culty world that we cover here. And of course, subscribe to the channel if you are not. And I always appreciate the support. All right. I'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.